Well, hello everybody. This is Olivier Melnick with Shalom and Messiah. I'm very excited today to have another opportunity to have a conversation with my good friend Dr. Andy Woods from Sugarland Bible Church. So we have an interesting topic today, something a little different from what we usually do, and yet connected to what we usually do. You'll see what I mean by that. But first, let me welcome my good friend, Dr. Andy Woods. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, brother Olivier, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So now, before I forget, because I'm really good at forgetting that, tell our audience how they can get a hold of you for the church website. I know you have a lot of teaching on your YouTube channel, so give us the information. I'll put that in the description under the video, but go ahead and tell us.
Yeah, all our stuff is pretty good, pretty well archived at Sugarland Bible Church website. It's slbc.org. And then I have my own ministry as well, andywoodsministries.org. Get us on YouTube, Rumble, go to the App Store, get our free app, and you'll have more of me than probably what you want.
Well, the people who start listening to your teaching usually don't get enough because there's
Okay.
really not that many teachers nowadays. You know, it's hard to find sound Bible teaching nowadays. So when we find, and I recommend your channel all the time because it's one of my go-to. So I'm uh, I'm always looking for the stuff you put on it. So I mentioned to our audience. And by the way, before I forget as well, this is YouTube and friends. We appreciate if you haven't subscribed that you would subscribe. Subscribe, tell your friends, give us a thumbs up, and this in the description. There's also a way for you to connect with Shalom and Messiah, my ministry, and you can. There's different things you can request. You can connect with us and ask for all kinds of things for free. And there's also a place where you can connect with us and donate to our ministry to help support the work so we can continue to do the work that we do. And many of you have done it, and we thank you for that. And I thank you in advance if the Lord puts it on your heart to donate to our ministry. ShalomInMessiah.com. So, Andy, I think it was a week ago. I think actually it was you who sent me that originally a short a snippet, like a sound bite of two people, and it's out in the public, and it's not like again, neither of us are interested in character assassination. We just want to expose you, our listeners and our viewers, to biblical truth. So whenever there is something that we feel needs to be corrected, then that's where we come together and we say, okay, this is what was said, but actually, this is what we really have proof that this is more in line with the truth is this, not that. So the two people that we're going to be discussing today, and again, nothing against them as people, is the gentleman that just about everybody in America knows, Tucker Carlson, and I was used to be on Fox News and now has his own channel on X, previously Twitter, and with a lot, millions of followers, and a country singer, John Rich, who used to be, and I don't know if he's still with that group. I don't really follow him that much. I just know that he's been doing this for 30 years. Big and Rich was the group that he was part of. I'm somewhat familiar with his music, but not too much. But that's not the issue here. The concern that I have and that I shared with Dr. Woods is what the topic that they picked, and we wanted to basically revisit that topic. And I'll put a link uh, to the video. And I think I just lost Andy right now. So I don't know if he's going to come back. I'm going to continue. If he comes back, we'll continue. Uh, we'll wait for a second. I'll put a link to the video so that you can view it for yourself as you also listen to what we are uh, doing.
Yeah.
So this is Dr. Andy Woods' brother, his better brother, who just came back on that. We lost you,
Yeah.
but I continue, Andy. It's okay. I just continue and said he's gonna come back and we'll pick up where we left off. So I was doing the
Okay.
introduction. I'm not gonna change anything. So yes, we are gonna look at what they said and revisit a few things. But before we do that, I also want to give a little bit of a concern of mine, and is that this is about I want to say less than 3 months ago, about 3 months ago, Tucker Carlson did a video on his channel where he invited a gentleman by the name of Munther Isaac. And he did, it was about an hour long or so,
Mhm.
and who presented himself as a Christian Palestinian or Palestinian Christian, and was really was giving Tucker and the audience explanation of what it means to be a Palestinian Christian and how they're suffering from what's happening in Israel. On the very on the surface, it sounded and looked like it was a plea to a plea for unity and getting along and understanding biblical principles and truth. But Munther Isaac has a long reputation of being anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian, and when I say pro-Palestinian, in a sense of pro-Palestinian, anti-Semitic pro-Palestinian, and he has been the tip of the spear for the this organization and the conferences that happen every 2 years, and we had one in 2024 known as Christ at the Checkpoint, which is really anti-Israel, anti-Semitic speakers, one after the other, disguised in this fake call for unity in the body of Messiah. It's very unfortunate. And and I'll put the link to that video as well. I wrote an article and I put a video of mine on it. You'll have all that in the description below. But the point I'm trying to make here is that I thought this was maybe one and done with this interview that Tucker did, and maybe he did not have a chance to do his research, which I find hard to believe. And then this video with John Rich came up. Dr. Woods and I have a bunch of questions that we want to answer. When you watched the video, what was your first reaction?
Well, it was, I generally like Tucker Carlson. He's a limited government guy like I am. But you start to see a pattern. First was Munther Isaac, as you just explained. And then a month or two later is this guy that's trying to trash the pre-trib rapture. And Tucker kind of likes to sit there like he's just learning about the information for the first time and he's inquisical and yada, yada, yada. But, two back to back things like this show me we've got a pattern at work here. Either he or his producer or whoever is intentionally giving platforms to people that are trying to tear down a Zionist dispensational understanding. And so that was probably my first reaction.
So yeah, and that was mine too. And I think we don't want to say, okay, we need to boycott Tucker Carlson, but at the very least, I think this has raised a red flag in my mind.
Yeah.
Two of those things back to back like this, I'm going to keep an eye, and if they keep coming, then my concern will turn into maybe like, okay, I just can't watch this guy anymore because I thought that I could trust him, but now he's really taking sides with the enemy. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying John Rich is the enemy, okay? Don't start putting comments in the video. I'm not saying the enemy is John Rich. I'm saying, it's a bigger picture here. But one of the things and I've got my notes here and they're all in front of me on my desk. I'm going to be looking down. But one of the, I think what got John Rich started, and he started talking about the Schofield Bible. And some of our audience will not know what this is all about. So give us a little bit of a history of the Schofield Bible, when it came about, and who started to use it and make it popular in a few words.
Well, I mean, Rich was right in the sense that the Schofield Bible came out with copious notes. Now he was wrong historically in saying it was the first Bible, study Bible with notes. The Geneva Bible, long predates the Schofield Bible and has way more notes in it than the Schofield Bible. and obviously does not, coming from the 16th century, does not have a dispensational perspective. But the Scofield Bible really was the first study Bible that came out with a dispensational perspective that your average layperson, could read it and understand it, and the notes made sense to them because that's all dispensationalism is it's a literal approach to the whole Bible.
That,
And
that
they
that that
could,
was my next question is, as you use the word dispensational, and we're probably going to be using it through the show, give us a 1 minute explanation.
yeah, well, dispensationalist is someone who believes God's purpose in human history is to glorify himself, a doxological purpose. A dispensationalist is someone who holds to a literal interpretation of the whole Bible, Genesis through Revelation, taking into account figures of speech when they're conspicuous, in the text. We acknowledge figures of speech. And then once you start to apply that literal approach to the whole Bible, you start to see very fast that God has separate programs. They're not just separate people, but separate programs for Israel in the church, which leads to pre-tribulationalism, which Mr. Rich was trying to debunk, the idea that Jesus is coming back for the church at a separate time, than national Israel. But these things are, and that's what we call the rapture, pre-tribulational rapture. And it really just starts with an approach to the whole Bible that's literal. And most systems out there are literal at points, or else they'd be liberals. You got to take something. You got to take the resurrection literally.
Right.
We're just unique, and we think the whole Bible, is meant to be understood literally. And, the Scofield Bible was really the first study Bible that developed that concept in the notes. It was readable, accessible to the lay people, where they could hear their preacher preaching and sort of have, like the Bereans did in Acts 17, verse 11, the scripture in front of them to screen their preacher to make sure these things were so. So it really was more of a pro laity, back to the Bible movement. That's the era that the Scofield Study Bible came out during.
Okay, and you mentioned that, your definition of dispensationalism, if I recall, that's the one that I adhere to, which I found in the book that used to be called Dispensationalism Today by Charles Ryrie. That's
Yeah.
so, I mean, and when you think about it, when any Christian would pause for a second and say, well, dispensationalism, it's like a word that scares a lot of people within the body, but they think about it, and if you ask a Christian those three questions without starting with the word dispensationalism, you'd be surprised how many would go like, oh, of course. Like, well, do you believe that God, the ultimate God goal for God is to bring glory to himself? And most Christians would say, well, yes. Well, do you believe that the Bible, even if they don't do it, do you believe that the Bible is to be taken literally? They would say, well, yeah. Making room for figures of speech, just like you said, they would say yes. And then most Christians who read their Bible seriously would see that there is a difference between Israel and the church, and they find out that, oh, I didn't know it, but I am a dispensationalist. More Christians are dispensationalists than we think we have. They don't know it.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't start off in this wanting to be a dispensationalist.
Me
Like,
neither.
yay, I started off because I really wanted to understand the Bible. I became convinced that the literal method of interpretation was the best way to interpret the Bible. And once you go down that road, you see that God has separate programs for Israel and the church. He's coming back for the church at a different time than Israel. God is not through with Israel. Israel has a future. There's going to be a millennial kingdom on planet Earth, followed by the great white throne judgment and the eternal state. And I
Right.
didn't, and you apply this. See what all I'm doing here is taking the same literal approach that you apply in the Gospels, the resurrection of Jesus, and I'm using it in the whole Bible. And so that's how you become a dispensationalist. You start to see these things; they become obvious once
Right.
you are committed to a literal method of the whole Bible.
Right. Absolutely. Now, he mentioned also John Rich. Now, John, like you said, that was interesting to watch the interview. It's about an hour and 25 minutes. And John Rich mentioned another gentleman that actually is a key player in this whole movement or this whole theology is John Darby. So before we talk a little bit about what he said about John Darby, who was John Darby?
Well, John Darby was a very godly man, and he was, I believe, part of the Plymouth Brethren movement. He started churches really all over the place. Someone told me he started over 1,000 churches,
Wow.
and he was a top. Actually, when you look at his life, he was a top-notch scholar, and he's really the one that as history unfolds, suffered that horseback riding accident. He was pulled out of his parish, although he had seen countless people coming to Christ, during his time there. And we're in the 1800s, early 1800s, and what does a godly man do when he's sidelined? Well, he starts to read the Bible, and he started to notice in the Bible that Israel has, getting into Latin a little bit, some a quo ad quem statements. In other words, Israel has a calendar, 70 years captivity, the prophecy of the 70 weeks. Going back to Genesis, you're going into Egypt for 400 years. And he looked at the epistles, which govern the church, and he saw no similar uh, a quo ad quem statements, beginning and ending points. And he starts to reason, during this time of convalescence, that my goodness, Israel and the church organically are different. Israel has a calendar. I mean, she's got different months on the calendar, she's got feast days. The church has nothing like that. She's a separate entity, a new man, as Paul calls her, entirely. And once he started to see these separate programs for Israel and the church, he says, you know what? The Lord is coming back at a different time for the church than he is for Israel, which makes sense because these are separate programs. And so from that, and what I'm dealing with here is ecclesiology, the doctrine of the church. From that, ecclesiology leads to his eschatology, meaning that Jesus is coming back for the church in something called the pre-tribulational rapture, where his feet will not hit planet Earth, but rather we, as First Thessalonians 4, verses 13 through 18 says, will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. And he's coming back for the church before Israel's 70th week, the 7-year tribulation period, transpires. And then it's during that 70th week of Daniel that Israel will be converted to Christ. Because right now, for the most part, she's an unbelieving nation. And once she gets to the end of the 7-year tribulation period, Israel nationally will call Jesus back to the earth. Matthew 23, verses 37 through 39. And Jesus will come back now in his second advent. This is over 7 years after the rapture.
But he
His feet will
lands.
touch, but he touches planet Earth. Zechariah 14.
And yes,
His feet will touch.
splits the Mount of Olive.
Yeah, Book of Job. I know that my Redeemer lives, and in the end, he will take his stand on the earth, and so he'll rescue Israel from the beast who's trying to wipe out Israel at that time. And that's an event that's completely and totally different than the rapture, which is for the church, which happened minimum 7 years before, since the church is not destined for Jacob's trouble because she's not appointed unto wrath. And so
And
that's
she and
basically,
the church is not the new Jacob or the new Israel. The church is an entity that includes Gentiles like you and Jews like me.
you know,
But it's
and
not one or the other.
yeah, and the word Israel, I think, is used about what 73 times in the New
Seven,
Testament,
it's, yeah, 72,
and
73, yeah, something like that.
in the Old Testament, I think it's like 2,500 times, and it's a technical word. When you see the term Israel, it never refers to the Gentiles or a mixed audience between Jews and Gentiles. It always refers to the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the point is, God can, like a skillful uh, playwright, can have multiple sub themes, and he can bring them to a conclusion. And that's what Darby was contributing. He was basically saying God has one program for the church, one program for Israel. which covers a lot of different things, including the fact that God is coming back, Jesus is coming back separately for the church in comparison to Israel. And Darby, I don't think came up with this because he wanted to see it. He came up with it through a literal reading of the whole Bible. And I noticed in the video they were complaining about how 90% of Christians believe this. I'm not sure if that number is right. I hope it's right.
I don't
It's
think so.
certainly it's certainly not right by denominational persuasion, but I guess they're talking about the laity. The reason that this view has an inroad into the minds of the laity is because it's very simple to understand. You don't have to go to seminary and sit under some kind of Gnostic philosophy to get this. You just have to be committed to taking the whole Bible literally. And when you start looking at God's promises to Israel, they're obviously not happening today. And they obviously have never been fulfilled in the past. So there must be a separate increment of time after the church is removed through the rapture where God is going to fulfill his promises to Israel in Israel's 70th week and then the 1,000-year kingdom that follows it.
But John Rich said that he calls it the secret rapture, and I just don't really like that title because it really, to me, it makes it sound like a conspiracy theory. The secret rapture, which is you don't see this anywhere in the Bible called that. But John Rich will say that the word rapture is not even in the Bible, and so how do you debunk that? I mean.
Well, let's be clear. When we talk about Jesus coming for the church, that's the event that we call the rapture.
Right.
When someone uses the expression secret rapture, it shows me that they're really not doing original research. They're just sort of reading what someone else said, which I think that's what Mr. Rich did in that video. I think he's hooked into certain authors because if you certain anti-dispensational authors, because when you take the Bible at face value, there's nothing secretive about it. I mean, it says in First Thessalonians 4:13 through 18, with a shout, with the voice of an archangel. Doesn't sound very secretive to me.
No.
And then this idea that, well, the word rapture is not in the Bible. I mean, that's just so silly. I can't believe people even use that argument anymore. But the truth of the matter is, I mean, two quick responses to that. The word Trinity is not in the Bible either, but we all use it to describe a reality in the Bible, or else we'd be talking in circumlocutions
Right.
constantly, which is a roundabout way of saying something. I mean, every discipline, whether you're talking about a surgeon or a car mechanic, they have abbreviations and things
Right.
that they use. And
Right.
so the rapture is our way of basically describing Christ coming for the church. It's the Greek word harpazo, First Thessalonians 4:13 through 18, where we get the word harpoon from,
Hmm.
interestingly, in English, where you spear an animal and pull it to yourself, a harpoon. Well, our harpazo, we're caught up before God's wrath starts as members of the church. And when that word, I think it was Jerome in the Latin Vulgate, what is that, fourth century, somewhere around there.
I think fifth century.
Yeah, right in there. When he translated, because the Vulgate means common, like vulgar. He was trying to create a translation of the Greek and Hebrew that the common man could understand. Well, back then, Latin was the lingua franca of the time period. And so he tried to translate the Old
Harpazo.
Testament and the New Testament into Latin Vulgate. And when he got to harpazo in First Thessalonians 4, I think it's verse 17, is it? Right in there, verses 13 through 18. He used a word, I think it's like rapturo or
Rapturo.
rapiri.
Rapturo.
And so when that word is translated into English, that's where we get our word rapture from. So
Right.
when people say, oh, the word rapture is not in the Bible, well, neither is the word Trinity, but it is in the Latin Vulgate. And so that argument has been so seriously rebutted and debunked. I'm shocked people even say it anymore.
Okay. Thank you for that. I mean that that makes sense. Now, another thing that John Rich said, he said that and I've heard it from many people who are opposing the pre-trib, pre-mill view of the rapture. They say, well, this is something that really started a little under 200 years ago in the 1830s, which will be around the time of Darby. I think Darby had his accident in 1837, if I
Hmm.
recall. So that would
Hmm.
be when he started reading his Bible. I mean, intently, like you explained. So, there are several books that I think you have them and I have them as well. One of them is I would recommend this called Dispensationalism Before Darby, and that has a lot of great research in this by William Watson. And uh, in my little bit of research, and I know you've done more, and you can maybe explain to our audience a little bit. I know that Irenaeus, Church Father Irenaeus or Eusebius. There are two of the church fathers who made comments in their writings about, of course, did not call it the pre-trib rapture, but they made a commentary that would lead the reader to understand that they were thinking along those lines. And also, if you can say a word briefly about the I never know how to say the word properly, the didache. What
Yeah, I think it's Didache is how you say it.
Didache, okay. Yes, excuse my French. I can say that.
Well, I've
So
heard a lot worse. I've heard people try to call it the Didash.
yes, no, yeah, that would be bad. So, Irenaeus, the Didache, and Eusebius. Those are those real sources that show us that the rapture predates. I mean, the concept of a pre-tribulational rapture definitely predates 1830.
Yeah, you know, I mean, here's the deal with all of that. When the Thomas Ice and Tim LaHaye started the pre-trib study group, which you and I are members of, we go to it every December. I've been going since 2001. I think they started that group in the early 90s. I don't think there were any known pre-Darby, pre-trib rapture statements. So at that time, the big attack against the rapture is it's late. It's an 1830 uh, theology. Oh, by the way, the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses came about at the same time. So, boy, if you believe in the rapture, you must be a cult like they are. And that's sort of what people do to try to knock down the doctrine of the rapture. But the truth of the matter is, here we are in 2024. To my knowledge, there are probably around 40, you know, discovered pre-Darby,
But
pre-tribulational rapture statements.
when we say pre-Darby, we don't mean like 100 years before. I mean, Irenaeus was what?
I
I,
think Irenaeus was around AD 180.
okay.
So, you know, there are some. I mean, William Watson wrote a book about this. A lot of pre-Darby rapture statements, backing up a couple hundred years. But the truth of the matter is, we found a ton of them that go way back to the early church fathers, as you mentioned. I mean, the first one that I'm really aware of, and historical theology is really not my expertise. There's other people that can talk much better about it than I can, but I do remember the pseudo Ephraim discovery. That's the fourth to the sixth century AD. And when you read what pseudo Ephraim says in a sermon, and you were to cover up the name, boy, it sounds almost like something like Hal Lindsey or Tim LaHaye or
Wow.
Dr. John Walvoord or Charles Ryrie would say.
And that's
And
fourth
and a
century.
lot of and a lot of the, as I understand it, a lot of these statements that are floating around out there haven't even been translated yet. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot more to be discovered. And so eventually, I think we're going to discover so many of these that it's going to put to bed forever this argument that pre-tribulationalism started in 1830. Now, I will say this: there was a time period in church history called the Dark Ages, where people were illiterate and the Roman Catholic authorities controlled everything, and people didn't have a Bible. and the mass was done in Latin, which was not the language of the people. Yeah, during that time period, you're not going to have a lot of in-depth rapture teaching. But the
And
truth of the matter is we've climbed out of that. And so that's the dark ages, and where allegorization was ruling the day, Gnosticism, all of these kinds of things. So there's an explanation as to why rapture statements start to disappear, or let's put it this way, become less prominent.
right, well, because
But even though that was
we,
true,
we
they're still there.
we don't have the invention of the printing press by Gutenberg
Yeah,
and the Reformation until what, mid 1500.
exactly.
So until then, really, the Bible was a for lack of a
Yeah,
better term, a luxury item. Nobody could
yeah,
afford one because they would take forever to copy, and only the bishops and the church fathers and the leaders of the church at the time, which became very quickly a Roman Catholic entity. They had access to that, but the masses that they had no access to, they couldn't afford to get one, and even if they could afford to get one, they wouldn't be able to read it.
yeah.
So yeah, so that there is that this time period that's at least 1,000 years, at least.
Yeah, more than 1,000 years. And when people bring up the absence of rapture teachings in the pre-Reformation Dark Ages, there's a historical reason for
Right,
that.
right,
But even though those historical realities were in play, you still find like pseudo Ephraim pre-trib rapture statements. And by the way, for me, it doesn't matter if Mr. Rich is right and the doctrine didn't come about until 1830. My reaction is, who cares? That's the same argument used against Luther when he was in the Reformation arguing sola fide, faith alone, sola Christus, Christ alone, sola gratiae, grace alone, sola scriptura, by the power under the authority of Scripture alone, sola Deo Gloria, to the glory of God alone. The five solas means alone in
right,
Latin
right.
of the Protestant Reformation. All of the popes and priests and monks said, "Hey, Luther, I don't find this teaching in church history. Where is it in the great teachings of Roman Catholicism?" And Luther's reaction was, "I have an authority that's higher than all of them, the Apostle Paul. I see them in the book of Galatians." And that's why he called Galatians Meine Frau, which in German means my wife. He says, I am wedded to the book of Galatians and then also Romans. And he stood completely and totally on the authority of God's word because the solas are found in God's word.
Right.
That's our reaction to the Mr. Riches of the world. Even if you're right, which you're not, on 1830, who cares? The
Very good
rapture
point.
doctrine is found in the Bible.
Very, very good point. At some point, he also, and I think that with all due respect, I think that John Rich and Tucker Carlson, uh, it looks like they either did not do a lot of research, if they did any research, or they got the wrong advice. But it sounded like I agree with you when Tucker Carlson was interviewing him. You could see the camera going on his face, and he was like looking like he was hearing this thing for the first time. It was like, wow, this is very interesting. And maybe sometimes it's just a method that interviewers will use to lift up the person they're interviewing and make him look like they really know a lot. But in the case of John Rich, I mean, from the beginning, like within 20 minutes of the presentation of the interview, he talked about the mark of the beast in the New Testament, and he says in the Hebrew it says, I'm going like, last time I checked, the New Testament was not written in Hebrew. It was written in
No.
Koine Greek and not in Hebrew. So those are little things that people will probably not even notice. Another thing he said, and you and I discussed it offline before that, he said the Antichrist. Here's another word that's never mentioned in the Bible, the word Antichrist. So let's, it's the person exists, the concept of the Antichrist taking over, and during the tribulation, as we see in the book of Revelation, it exists, but the word Antichrist does not exist. Well, like you and I, we knew that there's four places, and I'll quote them right now. I'll put them in the notes. 1 John 2:18, 1 John 2:22, First John 4:3 and Second John 1:7. Please be a Berean. Don't take my word for it. Read your Bible. It's there. It says Antichrist. So it's just, why am I making a point here? Because it, I don't like to backpedal. When I make a statement, I want to make sure that I double, triple check what I'm saying, especially as teachers of the Bible. And Dr. Woods would agree with me. We have a higher responsibility when we teach the word. We don't want to have to backpedal or correct for something that we said that was wrong, because sometimes the implication are we're leading believers astray. That's the danger.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's what really worries me, is that, the fact that somebody like John Rich and Tucker Carlson, they're famous people. And so inevitably, and Andy, I'm sorry to say this to you, more people will watch their video than ours. I just want
Yeah.
you to know that,
That's
it's
true.
it is the reality that we have to live with. It doesn't mean that we can't speak on the truth. Now, you mentioned something that was very intriguing to me. You mentioned about, when you listen to the video, talked about a couple of fallacies. So can you unpack this a little bit?
Well, I mean, this whole idea that if it's recent, it's must be wrong. That's called the recency fallacy. You don't determine truth by when it comes about. You determine truth by, is it biblical? And then another fallacy at work is what's called the odd populum fallacy, where, boy, the majority of people in church history didn't believe this. Well, that's determining something is true by majority opinion. And we know biblically that the majority typically is wrong about a lot of
Right,
things.
right.
Jesus himself said, broad is the road that leads to destruction. Many there are that go that way. Narrow is the road that leads to life. Few are they that find it. And then a third fallacy that you see at work is something called genetic fallacy, where you try to link an idea to its source and then you discredit the source. And you think if you discredit the source, you can discredit the idea. It's what liberals do to the founding fathers all the time. They gave us these wonderful limited government principles, and we're all endowed by our creator with certain inalienable rights. And someone will come along and say, well, don't you know that Thomas Jefferson, but that doesn't mean what he said in the Declaration of Independence is wrong. So, whatever you're going to do with John Nelson Darby, try to, him and Schofield, try to drag them through the dirt and talk about what terrible people they are. I believe a lot of those questions have been answered by people like you mentioned, Dr. Paul Wilkinson and
Yeah.
Dr. Thomas Ice on the Pre-Trib website. They did a whole 4-hour video, and I was there live to see the whole thing at one of our Pre-Trib study groups, where they responded point by point to all of these historical attacks against Schofield and Darby. But let's just pretend that Schofield and Darby were just horrible people. All the mud about them and slander about them is true. Well, that doesn't change the fact that the pre-trib rapture is wrong, because you can't demolish an idea by trying to link it to a source and discrediting the source when the truth of it is found in God's word.
The truth of it is
I
found in God's word, and then that, you and I today, we fall short of the glory of God. We're sinners. We're redeemed. We're forgiven, but we're not perfect. And then
yeah,
so, if you wait for the perfect person to teach you the truth of God, you're going to have to wait for the second coming,
yeah,
because none of us are perfect. Another thing I wanted to bring up, and that bothered me. That's how I got to listen to the whole video, was when you sent me this little 1 minute snippet. It mentioned that, and really, this is when you know that there is a deeper unspoken agenda in an interview, because talking about the pre-trib rapture and the book of Revelation, that you wrote this song, John Rich, and about the book of Revelation, that he got apparently inspired by the Bible and by God.
mm-hmm.
And so talking about this, and the trying to debunk the view of the pre-trib rapture, and he's talking about Darby, and all of a sudden, out of left field, out of nowhere, completely unexpected, I'm watching this, and he says, "And by the way, Tucker, did you know who Darby was connected to? The Rothschilds." And I'm looking at this and we're like, whoa. Now, what is the connection? If indeed it's true, what does a connection with a Rothschild have to do with the debunking the pre-trib rapture? I guess in a sense it would have to it kind of connects to the third fallacy of trying to destroy a source's reputation so that people will not believe in that source, like you were explaining.
Yeah.
But when uneducated or unaware or ill-advised people hear the word Rothschild, and I've written on this on my blog at shalomandmessiah.com, and I've done videos on it and papers that I presented. Um, and I might even do something at your conference next year. Should we,
Yeah,
in February? I'll let you talk
absolutely.
about this when we wrap it up. But so I've done research, not extensive, but enough research on the Rothschild to present the proper view on who they are and what they did and what they're not. And when people hear the word Rothschild in the general population, when they hear that word, what it means to them is Rothschild mean Jewish, world domination, and greed and money. That's what they hear. Oh, the Rothschild. Yeah, the banks. They own everything. They want the Jewish greed. And so what is that? Even if it was true, which it's not, and I prove it in the videos that I will link as well in this video. Uh, Even if it was true, what does Jewish greed or Jewish banking have to do with Darby's reputation and understanding of the proper biblical view of the rapture? I don't get it, Andy. I don't understand the connection.
Yeah. Well, when I sent that same clip that I sent to you over to Thomas Ice, he had already watched, the whole interview with Rich and Carlson. Now he's an expert in John Nelson Darby. I mean, he knows him and Paul Wilkinson are probably our two leading scholars in the whole history of John Nelson Darby. He wrote back and he said to me, the John Nelson Darby connection, I've never heard it. I've never even heard that before. So that was completely new to him, a scholar and expert in the subject matter. But the Rothschilds concept, as you well know, Olivier, better than anybody, comes from this uh, piece of anti Semitic garbage. I don't know, early 1900s, very early 1900s, if I have the date right. It's called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And
1905.
it's 1905. Okay. And so it's this idea that the Jews, you know, are behind every problem in the world, which I guess is not new. I mean, the Jews were blamed for the plagues in the Middle Ages. So the Jews are obviously in control of the banking, the media, the politics. And so anything that goes wrong in the world, interest rates, unemployment, it's the Jews, a secret cabal.
COVID,
Yeah.
election, everything. It's the Jews. Yeah.
Yeah. The impeachment of Trump. One guy got on the internet and called it a Jew coup.
A Jew coup.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's this mentality that the Jews control everything, and so everything that's wrong in the world is obviously the Jews' fault. And so it's kind of a if you're trying to debunk Darby, you just try to connect him to the Rothschilds. And I've heard the Alex Jones types say this. In fact, I had a guy when I first came here to Sugarland. He was a big Alex Jones guy who was coming to my church for a little while. He was constantly giving me all this literature, and he was trying to tell me that it was actually the Jews that were behind the secret rapture teaching because it's the New World Order that's trying to neutralize the church politically. Somehow they think if we believe in the rapture, we're neutralized politically, which is hysterical. It's
Yeah.
a hysterical because I'll remind people that it was the late Tim LaHaye who, through his Left Behind series, did more than any other human being that's ever lived, as far as I know, to popularize
Hmm.
pre-tribulational rapture. It was Tim LaHaye that gave to the late Jerry Falwell the idea of the moral majority, late 1970s, early 1980s, which involved a political resurgence of evangelical Christians into politics, which played a monumental role, in electing Ronald Reagan. But somehow it's this idea that the Rothschilds, to neutralize Christianity, came up with this pre-tribulational rapture idea to get Christians out of politics,
Yeah.
which historically is not true, as I've tried to say.
Right.
And so when I heard this with Rich, Mr. Rich, saying, Darby was linked to the Rothschilds, it's like, as the great theologian Yogi Berra said, for me, it was deja vu all over again. This is an
Well,
argument that's been floating around for a long time to discredit Darby. I don't think it works historically. And let's go back to our first point. Even if it worked, who cares? I
right.
became a pre-tribulationalist because of Jesus and Paul. I knew nothing about Darby, Schofield, and all these guys. What they're doing is they're just producing a logical fallacy called the genetic fallacy.
And in all fairness, Andy, I took a look at on my on my shelf in the books I have on the Rothschilds, and I found one quote of a John Darby that apparently in 1837, so I would suspect it would be before his accident, because it said that he was taking two of the Rothschild sons on a trip of Europe through Italy and other places, and but that's it, and it's so disconnected from anything that John Rich was implying in his in his using the word Rothschild. It's possible that there was a connection there. I can't confirm it because that quote is very, very vague, and I have to look more into it. So there might be a connection, but again, a connection doesn't mean an agenda.
Well,
It doesn't mean an agenda of takeover and control. Certainly not in the quote I got, which is again a very vague quote that probably has nothing to do with anything. But if I find any more, I will let my audience know about it. Well,
mm-hmm,
we're kind of running out of time. I like what you said earlier of the air. You said to me, you said, Olivier, often when people have something to criticize, they spend their entire time criticizing and saying why it's wrong, but they bring no other view to to balance and say, well, this is why it's like what we did. I don't, I don't want to pump you up and pump myself up, but we try to bring a balance to this, the mistakes that were presented on that video. But basically, what John Rich was doing, I mean, Tucker was just listening, and sometimes, honestly, Tucker looked more like a deer in the headlights than anything else. He was like looking and going like, "Oh, okay, I didn't know that," and so they didn't bring anything that would give us a chance to go like, oh, I never heard that. Let me look into that. It was just like it's wrong, it's a lie, and then so that's unfortunate. And I agree with you when earlier you said, and I think it's off the air, so I have to repeat it. But when you said that, I think you said Tucker should stay in his lane, and I think they both should stay in their lane. John Rich is a talented uh, country music artist, and that's something he does well, that God has gifted him. So
mm-hmm,
and I appreciate what I used to appreciate what Tucker Carlson did, his political commentary and analysis of what's going on. He gets it. He brings some very good information to us. But lately, the interview with Munther Isaac, I don't think that was good. And then this one with this guy John Rich, and pushing a little bit of the same agenda. At some point, he even said that the Schofield Bible is very, very much responsible for I wrote down somewhere. When I'm going with it, for some
mm-hmm,
of the America's foreign policies. And I
mm-hmm.
think what he meant by that, not in a positive light, he meant like, America's current view on Israel. And when I say current, I use the word lightly because not really current right now,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
modern, I should say. America's modern view of Israel was guided or as they would probably say, misguided by a usage of the Scofield Bible. And I think if I want to say anything to our audiences, keep an eye on future interviews that Tucker Carlson is doing. I'm going to try to reach out to him. I don't know if I can or if he will care. I'm going to try to reach out to him and see if I can have a conversation. I doubt I will get any response, but you don't know until you ask.
Yeah.
Now, Andy, final word. We've talked about the Bible. We talked about Jesus. We talked about the rapture. If somebody is listening right now and they're going like, this was very interesting, but I don't even know Jesus, and I don't even know if Jesus would care about me, and I don't even know what to do. If I want him to care about me, I don't even know what to do. So what would you say?
Well, I have something to say about that, but can I briefly dial back and address a couple points that you just raised there?
Please.
Um, well, one thing that didn't come up in our interview that I want to say is Mr. Rich kept saying, these guys, pre-tribulationalists, us, are teaching we're all going to be out of here when things get rough. Well, that's a misunderstanding of what we teach. I mean, Christians have been martyred in significant numbers, and it's been increasing, for the last 2,000 years. We've never taught we're going to be out of here before things get tough. What we teach is Jesus said, in the world, you'll have tribulation, John 16, verse 33, but take heart, I've overcome the world. What we teach is we're living in the devil's world. We have difficulty while we're here. But when Jesus takes the seven sealed scroll, Revelation 5, Revelation 6, which unleashes God's wrath on planet Earth in the seal judgments, trumpet judgments, and bowl judgments, yes, we will not be here for that. So let's just keep it's one of those things where you don't want to criticize something unless you understand what people are actually teaching.
Right.
We've never taught we're out of here before things get rough. Related to foreign policy, I think that's where the rub is. Tucker, because of his earlier interview with that Christian Palestinianist that you were talking about, has some kind of problem with Israel in the land and their alleged mistreatment of the Palestinians within the land. I think that's what Tucker's real issue is. And he doesn't like the fact that the United States historically has been very pro Israel, going back to George Washington. In the letter to the Torah synagogue, told the Jews, you can settle here and worship how you want. Going back to Harry Truman, who was among the first to recognize the newborn state of Israel. Going back to Richard Nixon, who helped Golda Meir in the midst of the what was it, the Yom Kippur
Yom
War,
Kippur War,
Yom
1973.
Kippur War, 1973. I mean, I think that's what Tucker Carlson's problem is. And he rightfully blames it on the Scofield Bible, which is pro-biblical and pro-Israel. So I think that's why he's drawn to these Munther Isaac types and John Rich types. And then your other point about how Mr. Rich spent the whole interview tearing down something or trying to tear it down. I could not discern, could you, what his actual eschatology was? I mean, I know you're not pre-trib. You spent the whole interview attacking it. Are you mid-trib? Are you post-trib? Are you
Couldn't tell. I couldn't tell.
three-quarters trib? And there's a reason they do that. There are no strong arguments for those other views biblically. So why explain what you are?
Well,
Why
he
not?
tell you what, I tell you what he is. He's anti pre-trib. That's what he is.
Yeah, yeah, and that's all I gained out of it. I mean, the whole, you know, okay, you don't like pre-trib, well, give me an option.
Give me
Give
an
me another option.
exactly. Give me an option and back it up with scripture. And that's
Yeah,
hard to do because it's not there.
it's not there. And then your other point about people need to stay in their lane, that's so important to understand. I mean, Olivier, there's a reason I don't go out with a guitar singing country western music. I have I've never studied it. I have no interest in it. I have no aptitude in it. And if I tried to do it, you'd be horrified. Well,
And
that's how as a trained, I have a PhD in Bible exposition, Dallas Seminary. That's the same horror I experience when I see a total amateur who because he's an influencer or a virtue signaler in another realm, get into my realm and try to make sense of things. He
Right.
just makes one error after another, right
Yeah.
down to saying the word Antichrist is not in the Bible. The Schofield Bible is the first Bible with notes. Uh, not a, trying to say something about 666 is Hebrew when anybody knows that John wrote the book of Revelation to the Greek speaking churches in Asia Minor, Revelation 2 and 3. And when John wants to be understood in Hebrew, he'll throw in a little descriptor, like he'll say Abaddon, Apollyon, which in the Hebrew means. And he has to do that because he's speaking to a Greek
Right.
speaking audience.
Right.
He doesn't do that with 666 in Revelation 13, verse 18.
Good
So
point.
the horror that he would experience if he watched me just drift into his discipline and start singing and playing country western music is the same horror. It's like watching an auto crash when a guy that's an influencer and a virtue signaler drifts out of his lane and drifts into my lane. So Tucker, stay in your own lane, your politics. And Mr. Rich, you stay in your own lane. It's country western music. Leave theology and Bible interpretation to people that have actually given themselves, to that discipline.
Yeah.
So that covers, I think, a lot of the points that you raised in terms of the gospel. You know, there is a blessed hope. This is what all these guys are trying to steal from the Christian.
Right.
That Jesus has promised, made the promise in the upper room, that he's coming back to remove the church from planet Earth before the wrath of God is poured out on planet Earth. That's the promise. And it's documented in many places in the New Testament. And people can be related to Jesus Christ and be tied into this promise by fulfilling a single condition, which is to receive. Another way of saying it is to believe or to trust in the completed work of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of their sins. I mean, Jesus stepped out of eternity into time to fix a problem that we can't fix.
Amen.
Our problem is sin, and he did all of the work in our place. His final words on the cross were, "It is finished," a translation from the Greek word tetelestai, paid
Yes,
in full. And he tells us, or he commands us, not to trust in ourselves to fix this problem of sin, but to trust what he did for us 2,000 years ago. And so simply by trusting, which has with it the idea of reliance or dependence, it's more than intellectual assent. It's an actual element of trust. Once a person trusts in that finished work, just like that, all of the promises that God has for them accrue to their account, including being tied into this wonderful promise of the soon coming rapture of the church, before the tribulation period even starts. And Olivier, sorry for filibustering, but can I just say one more thing, if you don't mind? Mr.
Sure.
Rich would read long sections of scripture on this interview without giving the context. So he spent a lot of time reading Second Thessalonians 2, which is all about the tribulation period, but he never read verse 2 at the beginning of chapter 2, where the Thessalonians had received a forged letter that the day of the Lord, or the tribulation period, had started. And Paul lays out a series of events explaining to them that the tribulation period had not started. That's why the Thessalonians, verse 2, were upset, because the forged letter was contradicting what Paul had originally taught them, that they be raptured to heaven before the tribulation period starts.
Right.
Along comes this forged letter telling them that they were in the tribulation period, and they were upset about it. And the
Probably
fact
scared.
that they were
Probably scared too.
and the fact that they were upset proves that the forgery was different than what Paul taught them. Because if Paul taught them you'll go into the tribulation period, they wouldn't have been upset by the forgery. So Paul lays out, I think, 5 eschatological proofs that they're not in the tribulation period. Now, all of that was context was totally omitted in the Tucker Carlson interview when Mr. Rich started in verse 3 and just started reading Second Thessalonians. And if that weren't enough, then Mr. Rich starts reading Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse. Well, the Olivet Discourse concerns the nation of Israel, not the church. That's why Jesus says there in verse 16 of Matthew 24, um, you know, flee from Judea, that's Israel, into the mountains.
Pray that it's not
He'll
going to happen on Shabbat. That's for the
pray
Jews.
that will not happen on Shabbat. I think that's verse 20. That's for the Jews. The whole context there is Jewish, and
Right.
you have to look at the whole Passion Week. Jesus, in the final week of his life before he died, gave two major discourses. He gave the Olivet Discourse on day 3 and the Upper Room Discourse, John 13 through 17, on day 6, uh, the last day before his death, as I understand it. And in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus is saying farewell to Israel. That's why all of those Old Testament passages are quoted about the 70th week. But in the Upper Room Discourse, he's saying hello to the church. And he's talking about the resources of the Holy Spirit, etc., which are going to be evident, on the day of Pentecost, etc. So in the Olivet Discourse, farewell to Israel, meaning Israel is going to be set aside for a season because of her unbelief, but God still has a future for Israel, where he will bring Israel to faith in the events of the tribulation period. That's what he's explaining in Matthew 24. That has nothing to do with the church. You
Right.
can't toss the church into that.
Well, he's
And
also he's also putting the church in the Bible in the Second Samuel, sorry, Second Chronicles, and my people who call by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their evil ways, then I will listen from heaven and will forgive their sin and they will heal their land. And he's taking that verse and he says, "See, my people." This is specifically speaking of Christians. I mean, he said that 2 or 3 times when he talked about that verse. So he's not respecting context at all.
yeah, and my land is the curses, Deuteronomy 28, related to the Mosaic covenant that God entered into with
It's
Israel,
Israel. It's Israel.
that will be repealed from the land of Israel when Israel is in faith again. That's what Second Chronicles 7 verse 14 is talking about. The church
Eh,
didn't even exist yet. But just real quick, Matthew 24, farewell to Israel. Upper room discourse, hello to the church. Now, none of that background is given when Rich just grabs Matthew 24 and starts reading it and making it sound like the church is in Matthew chapter 24. So you're dealing with, and he keeps talking about his dad was a trained pastor and went to Bible college or seminary. Obviously, if that's true, he learned absolutely nothing from his dad because his methodology is very erratic and
well,
faulty. Sorry
no, no,
for
no, no.
talking so much.
I think the best way to summarize this last point that you made, Andy, is to show our audience. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I was doing a recording for your pastor point of view, and on your desk you had a mug that said this: "I can do all things through a verse taken out of context."
Yeah,
So I bought a mug like this, and I love it's on my desk to remind me when I read my Bible to be very careful. And so I think that's what John Rich did, and Tucker Carlson really didn't have. Tucker Carlson doesn't have a Bible training. He said he recently started to read the Bible. Good for him, and I hope he continues to read it, and I hope he gets good mentoring by people who actually take the Bible seriously and look at it in context, and that's what I would hope for John Rich as well. But we have to do this because it's very concerning. A lot of people, like I said, a lot of people who watch their video will never watch ours, but ours
absolutely.
will be online for whoever wants to watch it and get the points that we try to make. Well, Andy, we can go for another hour, but we've already gone over an hour, so I don't want to go any longer than that. Again, where can people find your books if they want? Because you've written several books.
Yeah. All my stuff is on Amazon.
Okay.
Just put Dr. Andy Woods into the search engine. AndyWoodsMinistries.org. You can find them. All this teaching, and particularly our pastor's point of view show that you mentioned, is available on YouTube. It's available on Facebook. It's available on Rumble. Our pastor's point of view show is can be found on in podcast format. Just go to wherever it is you get your podcast, type in Andy Woods Ministries, and you'll find it. So our stuff is there if people want it. It's at their fingertips.
We are, let's say August, September, October, November, December, January. We are 6, 7 month ahead of the game, but there's a conference coming at
Yep.
Sugarland middle of February next year. Do you already have the speakers lined up?
I sure do. And I disappeared there for a second to reach my calendar, which I don't know if it's going to help me because this particular calendar ends in 2024. So I don't have the specific dates on the top at the on the tip of my tongue, but it's late
I
February.
think hold on. I think I might have them.
Okay, good.
While I look, tell us about the speakers.
Well, we're going to have a guy named Olivier Melnick, and he's going to be talking about the Rothschilds. He's going to be talking about the protocols of the learned elders of Zion.
And the Khazars.
He's going to be talking about the Khazar theory, which is this idea that the Jews in the land today are not real Jews. You know, we've heard AOC, Stu Peters, I think Candace Owens, a number of people making this argument, and we're going to debunk it. It's a conference on end times and also worldview. And one of the speakers is going to be a gentleman by the name of Dr. Randall Price, who is an expert scholar and archaeologist of Israel and the Middle East. He's going to be one of our speakers.
Wonderful.
And then we also have historian Dr. Bill Federer. A lot of people know him. Wonderful teacher on American Christian history, the truth about Islam, the truth about anti-Semitism. And then I'm going to be one of the speakers, and we're going to just kind of roll up the whole thing in a conference called From Faith to Final Days, where we're dealing with how to understand these end time trends and how to build a comprehensive biblical worldview. So it'll be a conference that will go all day that particular Saturday. We've got the
It's
registration page all built.
it's gonna be Saturday to there's gonna be a Shabbat dinner on Friday night.
There's going to be a Shabbat
Uh,
dinner on
and
Friday night led by Olivier Milnick at
so it's gonna be
nearby Sugar Creek Country Club.
21 February 21st is the Shabbat dinner. February 22nd is the Saturday all day conference, and Sunday morning some of the speakers will stay and do Sunday school and the main service, right?
That's correct.
So
So,
so mark your calendars 21st to the 23rd of February.
yep. And keep your eye on the Sugarland Bible Church website because the registration page is all built. We're just kind of doing a few little tweaks, and it'll be out for people to register. Unfortunately, because of our size, you know, we have to limit registration to about, I don't know, 350 people or so. And the banquet, we're expanding it. We used to be able to only do it for 150. We're upping the number to 200. And so it's just a great time to get away from your normal routine, come out to Sugarland, enjoy this great conference, and be equipped, you know, for your walk, you know, where you're at as a layperson or as a Christian leader.
And the beauty about Sugarland, which is the suburb of Houston, in February, it's not that humid.
Right, not like it is now in July.
All right, Andy, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to our next time together. And again, thank you for taking the time to come on the show and discuss this topic with me. God bless you. God bless you all. And until next time, shalom and be blessed.